Whispers echoed through the cathedral as a lone bride stood abandoned. Minutes stretched into agonizing silence. The groom entirely vanished. Then heavy oak doors shattered open. A chilling wind swept the aisles. He did not come to rescue her pride, who came to claim an ancient, unbreakable debt. The 17th of October was supposed to be the crowning glory of the Astor dynasty. Inside the cavernous nave of St. Jude's Cathedral in Newport, Rhode Island, 400 of the world's most influential elite sat in hushed expectation. There were state senators, hedge fund magnates, and European aristocrats mingling beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with $500,000 worth of cascading white orchids. In the bridal suite shielded by heavy velvet curtains, Genevieve Astor stood paralyzed in front of a gilded mirror. Her custom silk gown felt less like a triumph and more like a beautifully tailored shroud. She was 24, the last daughter of a rapidly decaying empire, and she was entirely alone. He is gone. Genevieve Vivienne. Sinclair, her maid of honor, whispered. Vivienne's hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled piece of heavy cardstock. His best man just found this in the groom's suite. Nathaniel left through the service elevator 30 minutes ago. His private jet was cleared for takeoff at T.F. Green Airport before we even put your veil on. Genevieve stared at her own reflection, her face an unreadable mask of porcelain. Nathaniel Montgomery was not a brave man, but he was a wealthy one. The Montgomery Holdings empire was the only thing standing between the Astor family and total financial annihilation. For 3 generations, her family had masked their staggering, insurmountable debts behind a facade of old money arrogance. This wedding was a corporate merger, disguised as a romance, a calculated sacrifice Genevieve had willingly accepted to keep her aging father out of federal prison and her family from losing their ancestral estate. "Read it," Genevieve commanded, her voice terrifyingly steady. Vivienne swallowed hard, unfolding the heavy paper. It just says, "Genevieve, I cannot pay the toll. They came to collect, and I refuse to be the collateral. Forgive me, but the Rothesay debt is now yours to bear alone." Genevieve's father, Charles Astor, sat slumped in a high-backed chair in the corner of the room, his face drained of all color. At the mention of the name Rothesay, the patriarch let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "The Rothesay debt," Charles muttered, his hands shaking violently as he pressed them to his temples. He found out. God help us, Nathaniel found out, and he ran. "Father, what is he talking about?" Genevieve asked, turning away from the mirror. "Who is Rothesay? We owe money to Wellington Trust, not a Rothesay." Charles looked up at his daughter, his eyes wide with a terror Genevieve had never seen in her 50 years of knowing him. "Wellington Trust is merely a shell company, Genevieve. It has been for a century. The Astor fortune was not built on railroads and shipping in the 1800s. My grandfather, he borrowed capital from a private entity, an entity that operates in the shadows of the global economy, an entity that does not age, does not forgive, and does not accept cash as repayment when a contract is breached." A heavy, suffocating silence filled the bridal suite. Genevieve had heard the dark, whispered folklore of elite society rumors of immortal benefactors who funded the Industrial Revolution, apex predators wearing tailored suits who ruled from high-rise penthouses in London and New York. She had always dismissed them as gothic fairy tales invented by the ultra-rich to make their wealth seem mystical. "You sold me to a ghost story." Genevieve's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Nathaniel's family was supposed to absorb the debt. His grandfather had immunity. Charles wept. But if Nathaniel has broken the union, the contract defaults to the firstborn daughter. "You." Outside the suite, the string quartet had looped the introductory prelude for the 4th time. The restless murmurs of 400 guests were beginning to echo through the cathedral doors. The humiliation was mounting a public execution of the Astor family's remaining dignity. Genevieve closed her eyes. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. The Montgomery cowardice would not be the final chapter of her life. Vivienne Genevieve said, her tone absolute. "Hand me my bouquet." "Genevieve, what are you doing?" Vivienne panicked. "You can't go out there. We need to usher you out the back. We need to call security and run like Nathaniel." Genevieve snatched the arrangement of white orchids from the vanity. "I will not give these vultures the satisfaction of whispering about my retreat. I will walk down that aisle. I will stand before Reverend Pendleton, and I will personally dismiss the guests. The Astors may fall today, but we will fall looking them in the eye." Ignoring her father's desperate pleas, Genevieve stepped out of the bridal suite. The massive oak doors of the nave were pushed open by two bewildered ushers. As she stepped into the threshold, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence in the cathedral was deafening. 400 heads turned. Cell phones were subtly lowered. Gasps rippled through the pews as the elite society of the Eastern Seaboard realized the bride was walking down the long, velvet-lined aisle entirely alone. There was no groom waiting at the altar. Genevieve kept her chin high, her eyes fixed forward. Every step felt like walking on broken glass. The scent of melting beeswax, candles, and expensive perfume suffocated her. She reached the altar, ascending the 3 marble steps, and turned to face the crowd. Reverend Arthur Pendleton stood beside her, his hands nervously clutching his Bible. "Miss Astor, where is Mr. Montgomery? Mr. Montgomery?" Genevieve projected her voice so it carried through the acoustic chamber of the church, "has decided to—" She never finished her sentence. The heavy iron-wrought doors at the back of the cathedral did not just open. They were violently thrown apart, striking the stone walls with a deafening crack that made several guests scream. Instantly, the ambient temperature inside the cathedral plummeted. The flames of 1,000 pillar candles lining the aisles flickered wildly, violently, leaning away from the entrance, as if trying to escape the incoming draft. The stained glass windows seemed to darken, casting a long, unnatural shadow down the center aisle. Standing in the threshold was a man who commanded the very air in the room. He was absurdly tall, his broad shoulders draped in a flawlessly tailored pitch-black tuxedo that looked more like midnight velvet than standard fabric. His hair was raven dark, swept back from a face of aristocratic, terrifying perfection. But it was his eyes that seized the room, a piercing, luminescent silver that seemed to reflect a predator's intelligence. Flanking him were 4 men in charcoal suits, moving with the synchronized lethal grace of a private military vanguard. Leading them was Dominic Mercer, a man with a scarred jawline and dead, empty eyes, who immediately locked the cathedral doors behind them, trapping 400 of the world's most powerful people inside. Panic flared in the pews, but it was quickly suppressed by a collective, paralyzing dread. No one moved. No one spoke. Alaric Rothesay began his descent down the aisle. His footsteps made absolutely no sound against the marble floor. As he passed the pews, the elite guests, CEOs, politicians, and socialites shrank back instinctively. Some of the older billionaires in the room, men who ruthlessly controlled global markets, lowered their heads in subservience. They knew who he was. They knew what he was. Genevieve stood frozen at the altar, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. The predatory aura rolling off the man was suffocating. Every instinct in her human DNA screamed at her to flee, to run as fast as she could, but her feet were cemented to the marble. Alaric bypassed the front row, where her weeping father sat, and ascended the altar steps. He stopped mere inches from Genevieve. Up close, his beauty was devastating, yet entirely inhuman. His skin was pale, flawless, and completely devoid of warmth. When he looked down at her, Genevieve felt like a dove caught in the gaze of a falcon. Nathaniel Montgomery is currently weeping in the fuselage of a Gulf Stream over the Atlantic. Alaric spoke his voice, a rich, dark baritone that vibrated through Genevieve's chest. He believed that the ocean could protect him from his obligations. He was incorrect. Genevieve forced herself to meet his silver eyes refusing to break. "And who are you to speak of his obligations?" A ghost of a smile touched Alaric's lips. It was a cold, cruel thing. "I am the architect of your family's existence, Genevieve Astor. My name is Alaric Rothsay, and your cowardly groom left you here because he discovered that marrying you meant adopting a debt he could never hope to repay." Reverend Pendleton stepped forward, his hands trembling violently. "Sir, you are interrupting a sacred ceremony. I must ask you to—" Alaric didn't even look at the priest. Dominic Mercer stepped up to the altar, a heavy, silenced pistol visibly holstered beneath his jacket. The implicit threat forced the Reverend into a terrified silence. Alaric turned his full attention back to the bride. "In 1874, your great-grandfather sat across from me in a parlour in London. He begged for the capital to save his shipping lines. I gave him the wealth of kings. The collateral was simple: a daughter of the Astor bloodline, untouched, unblemished, to be surrendered when the debt matured." Genevieve's breath hitched. "You're insane. 1874 was a century and a half ago. You look no older than 30. Alaric reached out his long, cold fingers, gently tracing the line of Genevieve's jaw. The touch sent a shock-wave of ice through her veins, but she didn't flinch. "Time is a mortal inconvenience." "Genevieve," he murmured softly, leaning in so only she could hear the dangerous edge in his voice. "I am the king of a court you didn't know existed until 5 minutes ago. Your father knew the debt was due this year. He tried to sell you to the Montgomerys to hide you behind their family's immunity. A clever, desperate trick. But I do not allow what is mine to be given to another." Genevieve's mind raced. The whispered myths, her father's terror, the unnatural coldness of the man standing before her. It was all violently, impossibly real. She was standing at the altar with a vampire. "So you've come to collect your money?" Then Genevieve challenged her pride, masking her terror. "Or are you here to kill us to make an example? I haven't come for blood today, little bird," Alaric said, his silver eyes flashing with a possessive dark hunger. "I have come for my bride." A collective gasp echoed from the front row as the guests strained to listen. Alaric turned, slightly addressing the terrified officiant. "Reverend, you have a marriage license on that lectern, do you not?" I do," Pendleton stammered. "But it is authorized for Mr. Montgomery Cross. Out his name," Alaric commanded softly. It wasn't a request. It was a hypnotic absolute that compelled the priest to immediately reach for his pen. "Write mine." Genevieve stumbled back half a step. "You cannot do this. I will not marry a monster, just to settle a ledger." In a fraction of a second, faster than the human eye could track, Alaric closed the distance between them. His hand grasped her waist, effortlessly, pulling her flush against his solid, unyielding chest. "You will marry me," Genevieve Alaric whispered against her ear, his breath chilling her skin. "Because if you do not say, 'I do,' in the next 3 minutes, Dominic will lock those doors and my vanguard will execute every living soul in this cathedral, beginning with your father. You will watch your legacy drown in blood, and then I will take you anyway." Tears finally breached Genevieve's stoic facade, hot and fast against her cold cheeks. She looked past Alaric's broad shoulders. Her father was on his knees in the front pew, openly sobbing, his hands clasped in a silent plea for her to survive. The guests were trapped, oblivious to the true scale of the slaughter that awaited them. She was cornered. Nathaniel had left her to the wolves, But the wolf had arrived wearing a crown, demanding her hand in marriage. Genevieve turned back to Alaric. The sheer dominance radiating from him was intoxicatingly dark. He wasn't just a monster. He was a king who had orchestrated this exact moment for over a century. "If I do this," Genevieve's voice shook, but she forced the words out with defiance. "My family's debt is erased. Entirely. And no one in this room is harmed. You have my word." Alaric swore, his eyes locking onto hers with burning intensity. "You will be my queen, protected by my shadow, bound to my eternity." Genevieve took a deep, shuddering breath, straightening her spine. She looked at the terrified reverend who was already weeping as he held out the newly modified registry book. "Proceed." Reverend Genevieve ordered, her voice echoing into the silent cathedral. Under the watchful, predatory gaze of Alaric Rothesay, the vows were rushed. There was no music. There was no joy. There was only the heavy, inescapable weight of a contract being sealed in the eyes of God and monsters. "Do you, Genevieve Astor, take this man?" The priest choked on the words. "I do," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the silver depths of Alaric's. "And do you, Alaric Rothesay, take this woman?" "I do," Alaric claimed, slipping a massive, centuries-old diamond ring onto her trembling finger. The stone was cold, cut in an era long forgotten. "Then by the power vested in me." Pendleton quickly made the sign of the cross. "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alaric didn't hesitate. He pulled Genevieve into his chest, tangling one hand in her veil, tilting her head back. When his lips met hers, it was not a gentle brush of affection. It was a searing, territorial brand. His mouth was icy, demanding, and overwhelming. A spark of dark, terrifying electricity shot down Genevieve's spine, leaving her breathless and entirely conquered. When he finally pulled away, the cathedral remained in dead silence. Alaric turned to the crowd, his bride secured firmly against his side. "The reception is cancelled," Alaric announced to the room. He looked down at Genevieve, his eyes gleaming with a possessive triumph. "My wife and I have a honeymoon to attend to." The descent from the altar of St. Jude's Cathedral was a blur of flashing camera lenses and suffocating silence. Genevieve moved mechanically, her hand clamped tightly in the freezing, unyielding grip of Alaric Rothesay. Outside the cathedral, Newport's coastal breeze whipped at her veil, but she barely felt the chill. A convoy of 6 matte-black armored Maybachs sat idling on the cobblestone street, surrounded by heavily armed men in immaculate suits. Dominic Mercer opened the rear door of the lead vehicle, bowing his head respectfully as Alaric guided Genevieve inside. The door clicked shut with a heavy, vault-like thud, severing them from the chaotic frenzy of the mortal world. The interior of the Maybach was dimly lit, smelling of expensive leather and rain. As the convoy accelerated away from the cathedral, Genevieve finally allowed herself a shuddering breath. She unpinned the heavy veil from her hair, tossing it onto the opposite seat. "You are shaking, Genevieve," Alaric observed. He sat casually beside her, a creature of lethal grace, entirely at ease. "Are you mourning the loss of Nathaniel Montgomery, or fearing the monster sitting next to you?" "I am mourning the loss of my autonomy," she replied, her voice trembling but sharp. She refused to cower. And Nathaniel was a business arrangement, a coward who fled when the ledgers didn't balance. I shed no tears for him. A low, vibrating chuckle escaped Alaric's throat. "A pragmatic queen. Excellent. But you misjudged the situation. Nathaniel did not simply run from the Rothesay debt. He accelerated it." Genevieve turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Alaric reached into his tuxedo jacket, producing a slim silver tablet. He tapped the screen and handed it to her. Displayed were offshore bank accounts, encrypted wire transfers, and a dossier of financial ruin. For the past 18 months, Nathaniel has been systematically embezzling funds from Wellington Trust, my front company, to cover the Montgomery family's failing European assets. Alaric explained, his silver eyes narrowing. He thought he could steal from a shadow. When he realized who he was actually stealing from, he attempted to use the Astor marriage as a shield, hoping your family's ancient blood contract would grant him immunity in my court. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. Nathaniel hadn't just abandoned her. He had actively used her as a human shield against an immortal executioner. "Where is he now?" she whispered, staring at the damning evidence on the screen. "Dominic intercepted his Gulf Stream over international waters," Alaric said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The plane has been rerouted to a private airstrip in Greenland. Nathaniel will spend the remainder of his natural life in a subterranean cell, balancing my ledgers by hand. I abhor thieves." Genevieve leaned back against the leather seat, the sheer scale of Alaric's power washing over her. The Astor family had been playing checkers. Alaric Rothesay was the board itself. The convoy didn't stop at an airport. It drove directly onto a private helipad where a sleek black Sikorsky helicopter waited its rotors, already slicing the evening air. Within minutes they were airborne, soaring down the eastern seaboard toward the glittering skyline of Manhattan. "You bought me to settle a debt," Genevieve said over the hum of the rotors, staring out the window at the dark ocean below. "But you are immortal. You could have taken my father's life, seized our assets, and erased the Astors from history. Why marriage? Why me?" Alaric leaned forward, invading her personal space. The scent of him, like ozone, crushed mint, and ancient parchment, was intoxicating. "Because Genevieve a king requires a queen. I have walked this earth for 900 years. I have seen empires crumble and currencies turn to dust. What I value is not money, but resilience. I watched you for a year. I watched you navigate the vipers of high society, holding your crumbling family together with sheer, unbroken will. I didn't buy you, Genevieve. I claimed my equal." The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward a towering, hypermodern skyscraper in Tribeca, the Rothesay Citadel. There were no logos, no corporate branding, just a monolithic spire of black glass piercing the night sky. As they landed on the rooftop helipad, Genevieve stepped out into the biting wind of the city. She was no longer a pawn in a failing family business. She had just been elevated to the apex of the food chain. The penthouse of the Rothesay Citadel was a masterpiece of Gothic opulence and modern minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city, while massive stone fireplaces and centuries-old tapestries hinted at the true age of its owner. Genevieve had barely stepped out of her wedding gown and into a silk robe provided by the estate staff when the glass walls of the penthouse suddenly shattered inward. The explosion of reinforced glass sounded like a bomb detonating. Genevieve threw her arms over her head, diving behind a massive velvet sofa as shards rained down across the Persian rugs. From the shadows of the destroyed balcony, 3 figures stepped into the penthouse. They moved with the same unnatural, terrifying speed as Alaric. Leading them was a man with stark white hair and a jagged scar tearing through his left eye. He wore a tailored crimson suit, his eyes burning with a sickly yellow luminescence. "Alaric!" The man roared, his voice echoing with demonic distortion. "Come out and greet your guests." Genevieve held her breath, pressing herself against the floorboards. She knew with chilling certainty that these were not human assassins. In a blur of motion, Alaric materialized in the center of the room. He had shed his tuxedo jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The cold aristocratic calm he had displayed at the church was entirely gone. In its place was an entity of pure, unrestrained violence. His silver eyes glowed like dying stars and his fangs were fully descended, resting against his lower lip. "Vincent Croft!" Alaric hissed his voice, dropping into a guttural, terrifying register. "You dare breach my sanctuary in New York! You broke the treaty!" "Alaric!" Vincent sneered, stepping over the broken glass. The Astor bloodline was promised to the European court centuries ago. "You manipulated the debt. I have come to claim the bride and drain her dry to balance the scales." Genevieve's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was the prize in a war she didn't even understand. "She is my wife!" Alaric's voice vibrated with a possessive fury that shook the floorboards. "If you take another step toward her, Vincent, I will scatter your ashes over the Hudson." Vincent lunged. The clash was not like a human fight. It was a terrifying collision of supernatural forces, moving faster than Genevieve's eyes could process. Furniture was splintered into kindling. Solid marble pillars cracked under the impact of bodies being thrown against them. Alaric tore through Vincent's two lackeys in seconds, ripping the heart from the chest of one and snapping the neck of the other with a sickening crack. But Vincent was older, fueled by a feral madness. He tackled Alaric, driving him through a heavy oak dining table. As the two ancient predators wrestled for dominance, Vincent's yellow eyes scanned the room, locking onto the velvet sofa where Genevieve was hiding. With a brutal kick, Vincent threw Alaric off, sprinting directly toward Genevieve. Instinct took over. Genevieve didn't scream. She didn't cower. As Vincent reached over the sofa, his fangs bared to tear her throat out, Genevieve grabbed a jagged 2-foot shard of reinforced window glass from the floor. With a primal scream, she drove the improvised blade upward, sinking it deep into Vincent's shoulder. The vampire shrieked, black blood erupting from the wound. It wasn't a fatal blow, but the sheer shock of a human fighting back caused him to stagger. That momentary hesitation was all Alaric needed. Like a shadow descending, Alaric materialized behind Vincent. With one fluid, brutal motion, Alaric seized the European lord by the jaw and the crown of his head, twisting violently. The sickening sound of Vincent's spine, severing, echoed through the ruined penthouse. Vincent's body dropped to the floor, lifeless and rapidly dissolving into a pile of grey, smouldering ash. The penthouse fell dead silent, save for the howling wind blowing through the shattered windows. Genevieve remained on her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands covered in Vincent's black blood. Alaric turned to her. He was breathing heavily, his white shirt stained with ash and blood. The monstrous facade slowly faded. His fangs retracted, and his silver eyes softened from a predatory glow back to their cool, piercing hue. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his cold hands gently taking hers, ignoring the blood. "You are bleeding," Alaric whispered, inspecting a small cut on her palm from the broken glass. "I'm fine," Genevieve choked out, looking at the pile of ash that used to be an immortal warlord. "I killed him. I stabbed him." "You distracted him," Alaric corrected softly, a fierce pride illuminating his features. "You fought back. Any other mortal would have frozen, begging for mercy, but not you, never you." He reached up gently, wiping a streak of soot from her cheek. "I promised you a kingdom, Genevieve. But to rule it, you must understand the violence it requires. Nathaniel would have let you die to save himself. I will burn the world to the ground to keep you safe. But I will not force you into the dark." Alaric brought his own wrist to his mouth, piercing the pale skin with his fangs. A bead of thick, shimmering crimson blood welled to the surface. "The contract is fulfilled by marriage," Alaric said, offering his bleeding wrist to her. "You can remain human. I will protect you until the end of your natural days, and you will want for nothing. But if you drink, you will leave the mortal coil behind. You will heal, you will reign, and you will walk beside me in eternity unbreakable." Genevieve looked from his wrist to his eyes. She thought of her father crumbling under the weight of society's expectations. She thought of Nathaniel, a coward who viewed her as a transaction. And then she looked at the immortal king before her, a monster, yes, but a monster who respected her strength, who laid his empire at her feet, and who had just killed to protect her. She did not want a fragile human life built on lies and debts. She wanted power. She wanted truth. Genevieve leaned forward, wrapping her hands gently around Alaric's forearm. She didn't hesitate. She pressed her lips to the wound and drank. The taste was euphoric liquid fire and ancient starlight coursing through her veins. The cut on her palm sealed instantly. Her senses exploded. She could hear the heartbeat of the city below, feel the shift of the wind, and see the world in breathtaking, terrifying clarity. When she finally pulled away, her own eyes were beginning to shift, catching the moonlight in a brilliant, predatory silver. Alaric pulled her into his chest, holding his new queen as she was reborn. The Aster debt had been paid in full, and from its ashes, an immortal dynasty had just begun. If you were captivated by Genevieve's descent into the dark and thrilling world of the Vampire King, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking tales of forbidden love, thrilling twists, and supernatural drama. Drop a comment below, telling us what you would do in Genevieve's shoes. Turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter.